And now it's time for another Power Play Post Show interview exclusive.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Power Play Post Show. He's a good friend of this show. This will be his fifth time coming on the show since we started talking to him. He has just retired from his playing career, playing professional hockey. And he started in Binghamton, New York, and became a fan favorite in Binghamton, and then has had a big journey throughout his career. And he retired, and we'll let him talk a little bit about that as well. He obviously previously just played for the Providence Bruins and then the Boston Bruins organization, and made his debut with the Boston Bruins, and the first time being in the NHL earlier in 2014 and 15. He, of course, is Bobby Robbins. Bobby, welcome back to the show. It's great to talk to you, and I think we've got a great story here to tell with you.
All right, Bob, happy to be here. I can't believe it's 5 times. I'm like a rugged veteran here.
Yes, there's not many people that have been on 4 or 5 times as a player and everything. So, but you're one of the most articulate people I know, one of the most passionate people I know. So, without a doubt, anytime having you on the show just makes the show even better. So, we definitely appreciate you coming on, especially during the middle of the summer where it's muggy in Wisconsin, it's muggy here in Binghamton, and if we can think about hockey just a little bit, maybe it'll cool us off a little.
I like it. I'm in.
Okay, so Bobby, let's talk first about the decision to retire, because there's a few things I want to talk to you about within your career and everything. But talk about this decision to retire. Tell everybody kind of what happened in 2014 and 15 season-wise for you, because I think it's important for you to be able to express this story here and then maybe in other avenues also in the future. But tell everyone about the decision to retire and how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, 2014-2015 season came, and I trained all summer with a great trainer out in Providence. I got to give him a shout out, Coach Macchione. He literally made me a machine, and I mean, I was 32 years old at the time, and a lot of people said that was too late. That was too late in my career to make the NHL. But Coach Macchione and I believed it from about 4 years ago when we started training together. And we knew this was our shot. You know, Thornton had just got traded or signed with Florida, and there was a spot open for that fourth liner enforcer role. And I had played the past couple of years in Providence and kind of had been bred for that role, and we knew that this was our time. So we worked so hard all summer and came into camp just flying. And I went into training camp expecting to make the team. Like my confidence was there, and I was ready. I had through a lot of help and trainers and coaches, I had molded myself into that NHL hockey player. And I ended up making the team, and things didn't turn out exactly as expected. I got clipped in my first game in a fight with Luke Shen, and got a concussion, and just kept playing through it. Played the next night in Detroit, and I was a bit of a mess. I was foggy. Decided to keep playing. At that point, there was literally nothing that was going to stop me. I mean, it feels weird to say it now, but my mentality at that time, you know, I was right in the thick of it, and I literally would have played to my death. That's kind of what I was. My mentality at the time was like, I'm a warrior. I'm gonna play to my death, and I was just gonna battle it out. That sounds pretty stupid now, looking outside of the tent we got set up with my little daughter running around and the little cookout we have going. But I mean, that was my mentality at the time. I was in the war zone. I just made the NHL, and I was prepared to fight the heavyweights in the NHL, and I was going to do it. I had prepared for it, and I was ready for it. And woke up that next day in Detroit and had a concussion. Knew I had a concussion, but you know, whether it was rational or not, just decided to try and play the game. And took 2 more blows to the head that game. And pretty much from that moment, it was all just a spiral out of control. That lasted about 9 months. And it was post-concussion syndrome and everything that goes along with it. And it was the ups and downs of, you know, there was the physical stuff, which was apparent for me. It was a lot of stuff with my eyes and my focus and different physical aspects. But after about a month or so, I really got into the emotional aspects of it, which we've all heard so much about, and I had heard about it all the time, guys going through the post-concussion syndrome and, you know, realizing how scary that is. But for me, you just kind of brush it off and you keep fighting and keep going about your day and about your job. It wasn't until I really experienced it that I went to some real dark places, Bob, and really went to the darkest spots of my soul, and I mean it really almost consumed me. And coming from me, I think the people on your show and people who know me and have watched me and read my blog know that I'm a real positive guy, and
yes,
I'm always like a half glass full kind of guy and looking on the bright side. And it was just pretty crazy to see how a couple blows to your head can completely changed who I was as a person. And my wife talks about it that, you know, all of a sudden I became this different person that she didn't recognize anymore. And it got throughout February, so it got real dark. And I mean, there was you know, the suicidal thoughts, real darkness, and self-medication through drugs, and it was just a real dark scene and real out of character for me. You know, where a guy a few months prior was just on, you know, the best shape of my life, spiritually, mentally, and physically, and primed to make an NHL roster, and did that and accomplished that goal. To all of a sudden be almost like on the flip side of that, spiritually, mentally, physically, just a disaster in all three of those aspects, and in some really dark spots. And I mean, that's where I was. That's my story. It feels weird talking about it now because I think I feel pretty normal now. But it took about 8 months, and I ended up working with a really good doctor. Sorry, I get a little choked up even talking about this kind of stuff. But I ended up working with a good doctor in Pittsburgh, one of the best concussion guys in the world, and he assured me in the darkest spot, you know, this will give you an idea of how crazy it was. You know, I flew there, and I think it was toward the end of April. I flew out there, and as I was meeting with him, he asked. My wife came with me because I certainly couldn't leave the house, or
sure,
definitely not the state alone. So she came with me, and you know, my first visit there, during our conversation, when we started talking about dark thoughts and suicide and those kind of things, and with a blank face is what he said, almost with a smirk. I told him that, yeah, I had been having those thoughts, and he asked, you know, how recently, and I said, well, on the flight here, I was having them, and he's like, well, what was happening? And I said, well, my wife dropped her pen, and that, just the fact that she dropped her pen and couldn't find it underneath my feet, set me off into this abyss, and I was closed my eyes and was just hoping and praying that the plane would crash. And that's really hard for me to say right now because I'm light years away from that spot. But in April, that's the reality of the spot I was in. And while I was there working with him for the next 2 or 3 months, he told me that, he said, you know, Bobby, you know, I've seen this type of vestibular concussion before. It triggers the anxiety and the fear-based response in your brain and your emotions, and everything you're feeling is normal. You're not on an island. I know that's what you're feeling like, and he was right. And pretty much everything he diagnosed and said, he was right on. And he said, Bobby, I'm gonna promise you that I'll make you have a full recovery by July. And I mean, I almost laughed at that because it seemed, at that point, I had literally accepted that I was just going to be in this state, that this was kind of the price that I had to pay for fighting 150 times and getting punches to the head. I just assumed that I was going to exist in this state, as scary as that sounds, but that's just what I had accepted as my fate and my reality. And he told me that I would be back to 100% by July. And he said, you know how I know this? And I said, no, I don't know. How do you know this? And he said, because I see this thousands of times of guys who are going through the exact same thing. And he's like, if you just trust in me and trust my protocol, I can get you back. And so I did. I didn't have anything left. I didn't really have anything at that point. I was at the lowest point of my life that I've ever been in. And I put my faith in his hands. And then, you know, I think about a week before July 1st is when I kind of looked around and said, wow, I think I feel normal. So he pretty much predicted it right on. And this is a long answer to your question, but going back to the original question about retirement, you know, after 8 months of that and getting back to baseline, and I was thinking about what the heck I was going to do with my life. You know, I had no idea. I mean, it was pretty much, do I make a comeback and make a comeback to the NHL and do what I set out to do. And at that point, I wrote that off and said, "There's not a chance I'm ever going to fight again." And it just wasn't worth it to ever take any more damage to my head. That was pretty clear to me. But then there was the other option of maybe going to play in Europe, where there's no fighting, and you can make a good living over there. And as I thought about that, I was weighing the risks and everything. And for me, the only reason I would have been doing that was for money and to make good money over there. And,
sure.
To put myself at a little bit of risk. I mean, there's no fighting with guys that are still hitting from behind. It gets a little chippy out there. And, I was like, well, I'm not going to fight for money anymore. I'm not going to go to Europe just for money. And, at that point I decided that, I've always been looking forward to my next chapter and seeing what that would hold. And I knew it was going to require a great leap of faith, and I felt that fear about taking that leap. But as I looked at it, it was definitely the right choice for me. And it was clear that my hockey days were over, and certainly my fighting days were over. And I had a hell of a run, and I'm proud of what I did. I played a 9-year career.
Yeah.
I guess 9.5 if you count my 16 games I played up with you in Binghamton after college.
Yep.
But yeah, I talked it over with my family and my wife, and I'm looking at if it was just me, and maybe I was in my mid-20s, it'd be a whole different story. But now I was 33 years old, and I have a little girl, and I have my wife, and I'm looking at her. I'm like, I'm seeing all these guys who are, now getting older with CTE and all these mental problems, and really no amount of anything was worth missing out on seeing her grow up, and certainly not missing out on money, because I never wanted that to be my motivator. And I just made that decision, and I made it maybe about a month ago, and I definitely made the right decision. And to be honest with you, I felt like this big weight was lifted off my shoulders, where I knew I wouldn't have to put myself at harm anymore, and I could get on with the next chapter, and that's where I'm sitting today.
I got to be honest with you. I've got a lot of emotions kind of going through my head right now just listening to that answer there, because there were so many things, so many layers to what you just said, and it made me think about some of the players that we've lost in the past 3 or 4 years, players who played the game similar to you, that were enforcers, that fought, that may have taken their own lives. And I think it's a serious situation still in all of sports, where there is head collisions and there's head trauma, and people don't look. We celebrate the big hits, we celebrate the fighting, we celebrate sometimes the collisions that even happen in the NFL or in football just in general from high school on up. And we don't realize what it puts the players through, what it puts the person through, because these are human beings. You're a human being. You have a family. You have a wife. You have a daughter. You told a story about on the plane. And trust me, that's going to stick with me for a very, very, very long time. And I think it should stick with everybody else for a very long time, because that's what it could bring people down to. I guess where I want to ask you now is do you in a sense right now today feel not just the weight is off, but lucky that you survived this, because you almost are, in a sense, you called yourself a warrior before. I call yourself a survivor, because we have lost players that we've loved in this sport due to some of the similar things. Do you consider yourself a survivor now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was dealing with a lot of the mental stuff. I was working with a really great psychologist in Providence while I was down there these last few months, and we talked about this. And one of the themes that he said was that I had dodged a bullet. Yeah. And
yeah,
we talked about that all the time. It's like, people who sometimes get these injuries don't get better from it, and sometimes it does. We do lose people along the way. We lost Steve Monador this year.
Yep.
And that was the big thing, was you dodged a bullet. You had 150 pro fights, and the 150th did you in, but it could have been a lot worse. And for me, I feel lucky that I survived it. And at its worst, before this happened, I could never imagine the darkness of suicidal thoughts and the feeling of desperation that somebody would have to kill themselves. And I would often hear about somebody committing suicide and just be like, man, I think the first thing we always say is, well, what a selfish act, what a selfish thing.
Mm-hmm.
thought that too, and I've said that too, and I never could even imagine. I guess you can't imagine what it's like until you experience it. And I never had experienced those thoughts before, and I was always a real positive guy. And then all of a sudden, it was literally like a switch had been flicked in my brain, and it's like all thoughts, all stress, all anything negative instantly went down this slide. It was like a water slide right to those thoughts. Like there was just a dark pool that you just slip right into, and then it was all that existed were those thoughts. For me, at least, I guess I can't speak for anybody else. So that's what I experienced, and it was around that February, early March when it got the darkest. I was really thinking about it, and just like it was a constant thought, and it was at its darkest point. I remember going on the internet and seeing the news about Steve Monador, and to be honest with you, I don't even really remember watching him play, or I didn't know him or know much about him. But I remember seeing that it was just a headline on Yahoo News, and I remember I saw that, and that was like my breaking point. I lost it at that point, and I just curled up in a ball and I cried. I sobbed and sobbed, and I saw my life, everything that I had in my life, and I was like, if I do follow through on this, that's what my life gets condensed to, is a quick little news clipping on Yahoo News, and then the world goes on. And it was at that point where I knew I couldn't go down that road anymore. And I'm not really a religious guy. I don't adhere to one faith or anything. I guess I think there's something else out there, that a greater power that we live for. And at that point, I just kind of surrendered myself to it. I was like, man, please help me. Please help me. And I just cried and cried. And I guess it was at that point where I started to less go down that road, that dark road, and more start heading toward a path of healing. And one step led to the next, and I ended up meeting with Don Sweeney and having a talk with him, and he got me in to see this really good doctor in Pittsburgh, and that was literally what saved my life, getting to this guy and working with him and doing his protocol. That's what got me, like, slowly, day by day, healing a little bit more and more and more. And then all of a sudden, like a month later, I was like, oh, I feel really good. I feel good. And then I would keep staying on that protocol. And then a month after that, I was like, oh man, that was nothing. I feel way better.
Yeah.
And then eventually, about 3 months in, I was like, I think I feel normal. And then as I was working with that psychologist who I talked to about that theme of dodging a bullet, he had mentioned that he said something that really stuck out to me while we were talking one day. And he said, Bobby, how long has it been since you've gone? This was at the time, it was like 7 months out. I was. He goes, how long has it been since you've gone 7 months without taking a blow to your head? I thought about it, and I was like, really never since I was playing hockey, and especially not in like 15 years since I started playing junior hockey and fighting. I was like, really, I've never gone 6-7 months without taking a blow to my head. And he had told me, he's like, well, maybe, he's like, your brain has probably never really had a chance to completely heal itself over all these years of constant trauma. And he said, I wouldn't be surprised if, as your healing progresses, you're going to feel better than you've ever felt in your whole entire life. And that was like this flash of light that came over me, and I was like, wow. I was like, I can't wait to feel that. And that's really what kept me going day after day. And I think I'm getting to that point now where I'm feeling really good, and I only hope that I keep feeling better, and I hope it does get to that point where I'm going to feel better than I've ever felt. Because I realize I'm going to really protect my brain, and I'm going out of my way to live as healthy as I can and to be as healthy as I can toward my brain, and that definitely means not taking any more impacts to it.
Now, I know your daughter's too young to obviously understand what you went through, but what about your wife? At some point you had to tell her, I need help and everything, but do you think that she ever understood truly how low you got and how dark you got in your life these past, about 4 or 5 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, she knew. I mean, she knew about the thoughts and all that stuff. I mean, words can only do it so much justice. It's
Sure.
the feelings that you're feeling that lead to those thoughts and stem from those thoughts. And she saw it in the darkest points. And I mean, at a lot of those times, I was not even there. I mean, I was just so absent. I was self-medicating myself, and I really wasn't even there. And as much as it affected me, it really affected her too.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden I come back from Boston and I'm a completely different person, and just out of my mind, really. And I mean, it was really hard on her. I mean, as hard as it was on me, I think it was equally as hard on her. And we're both kind of still getting over it and trying to come to grips with everything. And we're definitely not out of the woodwork yet, and have a lot of work to do with healing ourselves and healing our marriage, because it took its toll on all of us as individuals and on us as a collective, as a family. And I mean, I hope my daughter's just about almost 2 years old, and I hope that she doesn't remember any of this stuff. But it was just a lot of madness and manic, aggressive craziness. I hope she never has to see that again, and certainly I hope she doesn't remember it.
Bobby, let's talk a little bit about your career. Your first game was with the Binghamton Senators, and I did a little research. It was against the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins. And I want you to tell the fans, if you remember, you took a couple blows to the head, so you may not remember, but I'm going to ask you anyways, who were your line mates in that first game against Wilkes-Barre? And by the way, I believe it was actually in Binghamton for your first game. Do you remember who your line mates were?
I have no idea who. You'll have to remind me.
Okay, and I know you'll remember these guys. It was actually Joe Cullen and Greg Johnson.
Oh yeah, of course. We had a hell of a line that year.
Yes. That those first 16 games you actually did play with Joe Cullen and Greg Johnson. You came in obviously late after getting out of Lowell, the University of Lowell, and everything. Now, actually, in that first game against Wilkes-Barre, within the first 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the game, Joe Cullen scored a goal, and you got your first point within the first 2.5 minutes of your professional career. What do you remember about those early days of you coming out of college and playing, and obviously you got your start here in Binghamton?
Oh, yeah, you just brought up all these old memories that I had completely forgot about, Bob. I remember that game, and I remember that shift. That was my first shift.
Yeah.
And I had two of my buddies from Lowell, my college buddies, my roommates, were up in the stands. They made the drive up to watch my first pro game. And I remember that shift. You know how I play. I'm a pretty amped up, aggressive hockey player.
Yes.
I remember that first shift. It was probably like a 45-second shift. I went as hard as I could. I went so hard, like I just blacked out. I tried as hard as I could. But I did something in my lungs. My lungs hurt for like a week after that. And I had this almost like a smoker's cough because I damaged my lungs. I think I pushed them like past their capacity. But yeah, I remember. I mean, it was all worth it because we got an assist. I think it was the sloppiest assist ever. And I think I ran a guy through the boards and whacked the puck through my legs and off a skate or two, and then maybe Joe put it in the net. And yeah, I remember that. That was the best feeling in the world.
Now,
I'll never forget that.
Now, the funny thing is there was a guy who was a defenseman for the Binghamton Senators at the time, and he was a very aggressive agitator. He's probably one of the guys that would have pissed you off if you were on another team playing against him. He got the secondary assist on that, Jan Platil. What do you remember about Yanni Platil? Because he was definitely a kind of a fiery guy on the ice. I mean, he was always trying to instigate things with people.
Yeah, he was a fiery dude. I remember his tinted visor.
Yes.
I was like, I thought he looked pretty cool. He had like good hockey style, and he always looked like he played really fearless, and I respected the way he played, and he seemed to really piss off a lot of opponents. I liked that too.
I kind of figured you did, especially being a teammate. You probably liked that. Now, the captain that year was Denny Amell. He was a veteran and everything. What kind of things did you learn from Denny? Because Denny was that quiet French-Canadian kind of guy who, doesn't always say much, but he kind of did things on the ice that kind of, I think, helped teach young players how to play the game.
Yeah, I sat next to him in the locker room. So it's pretty cool to get to sit next to this this veteran captain leader. And I remember he'd always just sit there with a newspaper and a cup of coffee, and he had a little black book. He'd always be writing something in this little black book. I always wondered what it was, but I didn't have the stones to ask him. But I remember the one thing he did say to me while I came up there. I came up from college and wasn't really sure of myself and was wet behind the ears. And he just kept telling me, he said, "Oh, Bobby, I'm so glad you're on my team. Every team needs a player like you." And that's something that really stuck. He said it a bunch of times. He's like, "Oh, you'd be on my team any day, Bobby, and every team needs a guy like you." And that really got in my head that teams do need a guy like me and guys who are willing to go to the wall and to get dirty, get their nose dirty. And I think it's, for me at least, coming up from college and seeing these guys like seeing Denny Hamel dropping his slap shot bomb from the blue line, and seeing guys like Jeff Harima and Corey Pecker, and seeing these insanely skilled hockey players. For me, it was easy to get my self-confidence wrecked a little bit, or to get down on myself, because I obviously didn't have a lot of those clubs in my bag. But I knew that the one club I had was that aggressive club and that willingness to battle and to just never stop, game in and game out. And Denny Hamel really made it clear and made me know that in itself was a club on its own, and something that made me special. And players like me, that those rugged players, that's what makes us special. Because just like I can't score 50 goals like Denny Hamel did, he can't do what a guy like me does. We all have our own special characteristics, and I think that, for me, really honing in on that later in my career is what got me, eventually to make the NHL.
Without a doubt. And how many times can you say that you shared the ice with a Pecker and a Johnson on the same team?
Yeah, well played.
Bobby, on May 1st, 2000, and I believe it was 2000, and May 1st, when was this? Oh, it was March 22nd, 2006. You scored your first goal. But you didn't just score your first goal in a game. You scored your first 2 goals as a professional in the same game. It was a game against the Albany River Rats, and you got 2 goals in that game. Once again, you were being assisted by Cullen, and I believe Johnson assisted on the final goal of the game that you scored as well with 9:30 at the 9:30 mark in the third period. What do you remember about scoring your first goals? Because to me, for a guy who does drop the gloves, who had 150 fights, your first professional goal is something you're never going to forget.
Bob, I still have the puck from that goal.
Nice.
And, I'll never forget that. They're both pretty similar, just getting in on the forecheck and walking out of the corner real quick and just firing a shot, kind of like as I'm coming out of the corner and firing it low on net. And I would imagine I probably had my eyes closed for both of them and just tried to shoot as hard as I could, and somehow they went in, and I'll never forget that. 2 goals in one game. Everybody, all my family and friends were freaking out. They were so pumped for me, and yeah, that was awesome. I'll never forget that.
Now, obviously, scoring goals are obviously very important in getting that first goal and everything. But you developed your style and your brand of hockey throughout, obviously, your nine and a half year career and everything. You told me about a time where you were addicted to, I believe it was chewing tobacco. You battled through that. You went overseas. You played a little bit overseas, and then you came back a more focused hockey player and everything. You came back, and I think you played with Bakersfield and in Chicago, and then you came back up to the AHL, started playing with Providence and whatnot. I got to imagine playing in Binghamton was a great time for you, but probably playing these last few years with Providence had to be very, very special to you because of how focused you were, and you were probably playing the best hockey of your career, even if you didn't score 18 goals or 21 goals like you did in the EAHL or the ECHL in Elmira and everything. You didn't score that many goals, but you played very focused hockey, and you were a leader on the ice as well.
Yeah, it almost feels like I had 2 careers, like pre-Europe and post-Europe. And when I came back from Europe, I was 28 or 29 years old. And yeah, like you said, the catalyst for everything was me quitting chewing tobacco. That was just this massive monkey on my back, and that really consumed me. And it was after that year that I came back from from Jesenice in the Austrian league. I had a real rough year. My hockey career wasn't going anywhere. I had visions of having a great European career at that point, and at this point, I barely even played while I was over there. I felt like I was kind of just like just a statue on the bench, just sitting around.
Right.
And came back, and after a season like that, I wasn't going to get a job in Europe, and didn't. I'd been gone for 2 years from the North American scene, and you can quickly get forgotten in 2 years of hockey. So I was just kind of sitting around and didn't really have anything to do, and was at a crossroads in hockey and in my life, and just quitting tobacco. I had, long story. You can read about it on my blog. But I had a cancer scare. I had a big spot in my mouth.
Yep.
And had to get a biopsy on it. And at that point, was chewing 2 cans of Grizzly Wintergreen a day.
Oof.
Never met anybody who could chew more hardcore than me. I don't know if I'm proud of that anymore, but I guess in my chewing days, I was proud of it. And
right.
Probably called a lot of people out for being pussies for not being able to chew as much as me. But that's just what I did. I played hockey. I worked out. I had a good time, and I chewed a hell of a lot of tobacco, and that was my life. And I guess how it goes. All of a sudden, I met a really good girl, and then I decided. I guess I was forced to decide to quit chewing tobacco when I had this spot in my mouth and had a biopsy. And I really thought, this is it. I had chewed for 11 years, 2 cans a day. I hardlined it. It seems to be my MO, is I hardline whatever I do. And after doing that for 11 years, I was like, oh no, this is it. And so again, I just kind of threw up my hands. I was like, I'll quit right now. I'll quit right now, and I'll never touch that crap again. And I did. I quit cold turkey, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. At that point, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And it was like I emerged from that, this completely different version of myself, an improved version of myself. And as I was going over my options, I was like, okay, I can go back to Belfast in Europe. I could play maybe in the Central League. I could maybe get a job in the East Coast. What should I do? And I could quit hockey and get a real job. I literally made a list on this notebook, which I still have, and it made a list of about 5 different options. And the last option was fight for real, learn how to fight, make the NHL. And I had pros and cons of each, and that was the hardest one. That was the most ridiculous one. At this point, I was 28, 29. I was fat and out of shape. I didn't have a job. I didn't really have much of anything going for me. And I think that's just what I needed. I needed to have really nothing. And that's what maybe made me just dumb enough to think it was possible that I could actually do it. And I just willed myself. I said, well, I'm going to do it. I finally made the decision, and I learned how to fight. I trained with a boxer, and I knew I was going to have to start in the low-level minors, and got myself a weekly contract in Bakersfield. And when I went out there, I just told myself, I was like, well, I'm just going to fight. I'm going to fight everyone. I know I'm an okay fighter. I've been in a few fights, but I know the only way I'm going to get good at fighting is if I fight. And it was the scariest thing. That was one of my biggest fears. I was so scared to fight for some reason, and I just knew that I wanted to face that fear, and I was only going to be able to face it by actually doing it. So I went out there, and the first exhibition game was against the Las Vegas Wranglers in Vegas. And the first shift, there's a big guy, Michael Findorf, this big 6'5" power forward, I guess this up-and-coming rookie tough guy.
Yep.
And so we had given each other the hairy eyeball in warm-ups, and we knew we were going to end up fighting that game. And first shift came, we dropped the gloves, and I was so pumped. I had trained how to throw some pretty crisp punches, rights and lefts, and I threw a left. Well, my first left I ever threw in a fight, in a hockey fight. I threw a quick left in there, and ended up doing pretty good in the fight. Landed on top and skated to the penalty box, looked down at my hand, and just was devastated. I had severed a tendon in my hand, had this massive gash. Tendon was hanging out, blood everywhere. That left I threw hit him in the teeth and knocked out his 2 front teeth, but at the same time severed the tendon in my hand. And that was a 3-month recovery. So like I had just made this comeback and had this new lease on life, and I was going to do this. I was going to fight my way to the NHL, and I didn't give a crap what anybody said, if it was possible or not, or if I was too old, I wasn't good enough. I didn't care what anybody said. I was going to do it. I'm going to show them how, and I'm going to do it by fighting. First game, exhibition game, I'm out for 3 months. So over those 3 months, I really had to. It was a moment of self-examination where I was like, "This is the reality. It's not some some storybook ending. It's some fairy tale story where everything just works out. Like this is real fighting. This is like I was looking at my hand. I'm doing this the most tedious therapy to get back to where I was at, and I had this moment where I had to ask myself whether I was really in it for the long haul. And I'm a pretty stubborn dude, and I just took a look in the mirror and said, I'm in it. I'm in it for the long haul. And I healed after those 3 months and came back and did what I set out to do and fought the rest of that year. And, I mean, kept fighting and fighting. And, the biggest thing was it wasn't just about the fighting. Like, hockey had changed since I'd left. Like, the one-dimensional goon didn't really exist anymore. And
right.
At that point in 2010 or so, the goon was kind of just starting to get phased out, and I knew I had to be a really good hockey player. And I mean, hockey is what I did.
Bobby, let me ask you this question though: did you consider yourself a goon kind of hockey player before then? And because you're talking about making that realization that kind of player is out, and that you can't just fight your way to the NHL. Did you consider yourself a goon hockey fighter? Because coming from an enforcer, hearing that word goon, which I would never have thought I would have heard from an enforcer or a fighter, did you consider yourself that before that?
No, I mean before that, I don't really know if you remember too much about those early days, like in Binghamton and Elmira, but I was just a hard-nosed, rugged power forward.
Yes.
I led my team in scoring in college, and I came into pros, and I was like, I'm just going to play the same way. So any chance I get, I tried to run somebody through the glass.
Yeah.
I just love checking. I always did. I love the aspect of hockey of body checking, and that was one of my skills. That's one of the things I'm really good at, and just always naturally was, even as a bantam and coming up through the younger ranks. And so as I played those first few years of pro, if I'd really smoke somebody would drop their gloves and challenge me. I would fight, but I'd kind of try and end it as fast as I could. And if people would ask me to fight, if I really ran a guy, and then at the next face-off, if they asked me, I would say no. And I mean, looking back on it, I feel kind of embarrassed to say it, but the reason I was saying no is because I let fear consume me.
Mm-hmm.
And when those first couple of years, I had like 7 or 8 fights a year, but they weren't like real fights where I fought a tough guy and went toe to toe. And it was more just answering the bell if I really smoked a guy through the glass. And so I ended up in Europe where there was really no fighting. And as I had those revelations about myself over that summer when I quit tobacco, I kind of looked at my hockey career and looked at what kind of player I was, and I was a power forward, but I always thought that fighting aspect was missing from my game. I always kind of knew instinctively that if I looked at guys and I always felt a little envious about seeing how cavalier they could be about fighting, when for me it just consumed me with fear. And I just knew that I was an effective power forward. I was a very effective body checker. I could play the game, which separated me from those one-dimensional goons, and I could be a really effective hockey player. But I knew that if I added that fighting element, I just had a feeling that would make me the complete power forward, and I knew that would allow me to get to the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
Like from that vantage point where I was at 5 years ago, I saw guys like Chris Neal. I always looked up to him,
yep.
Especially being in the Senators organization. I looked at a guy like that who was just tough as nails, but could still play the game and could check and score goals. And I always looked up to him when I was up there at training camp in Ottawa. And that's kind of the player who I wanted to be like. And I knew that I could play that physical aspect, but it was the fighting aspect that just consumed me. And I knew that for me, like I said, I hardline everything I do. For me, it wasn't going to be like, all right, just go fight a few times here and there. For me, I knew that getting over my fear of fighting meant trying to fight every night and trying to fight everybody. And that's really what I did. Is I tried to play as good a hockey as I can and really focused every day on becoming the best hockey player I could. And while at the same time becoming the best fighter I could and fighting as much as I could. So it's kind of like I was living these dual roles as a hockey player and as a fighter, and that's the way it is now. That you can't just be a fighter, and I think that's what eventually got me to the NHL. As my fighting got better and better, my hockey also got better and better, and it was all because of good coaching within the Bruins organization, and working with Butch Cassidy in Providence and Dino in Providence here. My hockey got better and better every year. And then I also got to work with Dougie Smith, if you know who that is, the original Goon.
Yeah.
He's the inspiration behind the movie The Goon and the book The Goon.
Yep. And
he's a cop up in Mass, and he came down and worked with me and a few of the other tough guys in Providence. He was our fighting coach, and he taught me so much about the fight game and just taught me how to stay in the pocket and to be able to be defensive while staying in the pocket. And it was after working with him my first year in Providence that my fighting really, got better and better. I know we talked a lot about Jimmy Bono, and a lot of respect for that guy, and we've had a lot of battles over the years, and he's a real great guy and a real character guy. And I remember when I first got called up to Providence, it was like, wow, I might be over my head here when it's my second game, and Jimmy Bono, who I've seen, this legendary guy on YouTube, all his fights, he's asking me to fight off the opening draw. And obviously it's my second game, I can't say no. And so I dropped the gloves with Jimmy Bono and literally don't even belong in the same fisticuff as him. He just kind of spun me around and punched me a bunch of times in the head, and then his strength and momentum just dropped me down, and he landed on top of me. And I was like, oh man, I'm glad that's over. And then coming from that, 4 years later, to being able to go toe-to-toe with a guy like Bono and ending in a stalemate and looking each other in the eye and saying, hell of a fight, man. And
respect.
I remember once later, a lot of respect. Last year, I remember we got in a good fight toe-to-toe, and it ended in a stalemate. We kind of were looking at each other, and he said something to me. He said, wow, he goes, great. This is right after a fight. The refs are coming in. He said, you're really progressing well, Bobby. Keep going, man. It's going to happen. And just to hear a guy like that, who I watched and studied all his fights, and to hear him say that, and to be able to fight a guy like that and have that mutual respect, it's a pretty cool thing. And that's something I'm going to miss about the fight game and the hockey game. But I'll always have those memories and have the clips on YouTube to watch.
Let me get you a couple quick hits from you. First of all, were you more nervous skating on the ice for the first time in Binghamton, New York, or in when you played your first NHL game? Which one were you more nervous skating onto the ice for?
Oh, Binghamton, hands down.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Do you believe in 10 years hockey will still have fighting in it?
I don't believe in 10 years that they'll still be fighting in hockey. I think it'll be phased out sooner than 10 years.
Now, going through the experience that you went through, is that a good thing?
For a guy like me, would I have made it to the NHL if I didn't have hockey fights? I don't know. I don't know if I would, but it's definitely. I think it's going to be like how we look back on the old timers who used to play with no helmets, and you're like, wow, what a bunch of savages they were. I can't believe they did that.
Right.
And then I think it's going to be the same thing. The younger generations are going to look back at guys like us and watch the old fights and be like, wow, I can't believe that used to be in hockey. What a bunch of animals. They're warriors. And I just think that's the way it's going to be, for good or for worse. And I don't really have an opinion if it's good or bad. I just think that's the way it's going to be, and that's the natural progression that you can see the crackdown on already happening with visors and the helmet rule and the instigator rule.
Sure.
And the crackdown's happening, and especially now with the whole concussion issue being such a hot-button topic, it's just a matter of time, I think, before it's going to be phased out.
Sean Avery wrote an article about how hockey players need to prepare for life after hockey. I know it's very soon after you announce your retirement. I know it's very soon after you have recovered from a very, a difficult thing in your life. Have you thought about what your future is after hockey? Obviously, you want to take care of your wife and your daughter and, and provide for them. But what is Bobby Robbins going to do now after hockey?
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about long and hard here, and I think whatever I do, I'm going to be some sort of a content creator.
Yeah.
And whether that's through writing, through podcasting, through my website, through books, through video, whatever it's going to be, I'm going to create content. And right now, my process is, right now I'm just kind of sorting through myself, my body, my mind, and my spirit, and taking care of that healing, and knowing that once I get all of that aligned, I'm going to have a clear vision of what kind of content and what my message should be, because I have a lot of different messages I could have, and a lot of different angles I can take on content creation and media creation. But as far as I'm concerned, I just want whatever my work is, my art next, just to be truthful and to just to come directly from my soul, and just to almost splatter right out there onto the page or onto the website, and be something that people read and can get inspired from, and to say, wow, Bobby's he's not bullshit. Like, he's speaking it from the heart, and you can take it or leave it, and hopefully people will respect it and get something from it. And I think that I'm in a position where I can affect the world positively and use my experience and the fact that I got to be a pro hockey player and have these experiences and have a following on social media and on the internet. I think those are great gifts that I have, and I think it'd be a shame if I didn't use them to do something good and try to inspire people to chase their dreams. Because 5 years ago I was in a spot where I could have either chased my dreams or just did what everybody else does and play it safe. And hopefully I can inspire people not to play it safe and to chase their dreams. Because if there's one thing this whole 9-month, 8-month ordeal and this injury has taught me, it's that your life can dramatically change in a split second, and it'd be a shame not to live it to your soul's full potential, and to live your life with meaning and passion. And that's kind of what I'm looking for these days, is to live with meaning and passion, and to create whatever I'm going to create, whatever art it's going to be. I'm sure obviously the written word, but also with my website and stuff, I think whatever I create, I just want it to be passionate and from my heart. And that's kind of the process that I'm in right now. And I'm just making the transition from athlete to artist and content creator. It's a process, and it's an intense thing that I'm currently going through. And a big part of that for me is healing completely from this, which still, I'm still on the tail end of that, where I'm maybe a month or two into actually feeling normal now. And I guess for me, it's just to continue to keep healing and hope that I keep feeling better and better, and to come to grips with everything. And then when the timing's right to make that leap and to take the plunge, take the leap of faith.
Well, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, this conversation has kind of touched me in a lot of different ways, due to the fact that I remember seeing you skate onto the ice for the first time in Binghamton, getting to know you over the conversations that we've had here on the Power Play Post Show, watching your career, rooting for you, watching a Boston Bruins game that normally I wouldn't have watched, but I did because you were playing in it and everything, and being able to talk to you today after what you've gone through over the past 9 months. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, I'm glad we were able to have this conversation today, because it's good for people to hear. And on a personal level, I'm just glad that I'm able to still talk to you and have conversations with you, and that your daughter still has a father. That's the most important thing here. Hockey doesn't matter when it comes down to your daughter still having you in her life and your wife having you in your life. And I can still call you up or contact you and say, hey, Bobby, let's have a conversation, because I think it's great for the world. So I personally want to say that I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that doctor in Pittsburgh, whatever his name is, he's awesome. He's amazing. I'm glad for that. I know Providence Bruins fans will think that, and I know fans all throughout the American Hockey League and everywhere that you've played are happy that you're having this conversation with me here, and that you can continue to have these conversations and tell your story. And once again, Bobby, it's probably one of the better interviews that I get to do anytime I have you on. So I totally appreciate it.
Well said. I don't know how to respond to that. But, I mean, I hope to be on again and tell you what's happening in the next chapter down the line here. And the doctor's name in Pittsburgh is Mickey Collins. He's the guy who Sidney Crosby worked with. And
nice.
If anybody's going through this stuff with concussion syndrome. And just know that you're not on an island, you're not alone, and it's very real. You might be in some dark spots now, and there doesn't seem like there's any light at the end of that tunnel, but I guarantee that there is, and there are resources out there. And if you can reach out to, a guy, he's one of the best in the world, and he saved my life, Dr. Mickey Collins, and the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. I owe a lot of thanks to them, and a lot of thanks to the Bruins for sending me there, because I certainly know it wasn't cheap. And check that out. There's a lot of resources out there. And
yes.
You know what? If you're having a hard time, hit me up on Facebook and Twitter, and I'll talk to you too. And I'll give you my advice and my story and any good vibes that I can send your way. So hit me up on there. And always a pleasure to be on, Bob. And like I said, I'd love to be on again down the line when I figure some stuff out. And I know on behalf of hockey fans, AHL fans, and hockey fans in general, we all appreciate what you're doing. It's pretty awesome that you put these podcasts out, and you're a hell of a host. It's always good to talk to you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate it. He is Bobby Robbins, former Providence Bruin. Hey, we can also say he's a former Boston Bruin as well. That's a pretty cool thing. And we'll be right back right after this, right here on the Power Play Post Show.
Thanks for listening to this Power Play Post Show interview exclusive. Remember to join Bob and Megan every Thursday night for an all-new edition of the Power Play Post Show.